One thing I never understood the point of buying are these flashback consoles that have been popping up over the past few years. The first one that really, caught on was the NES Classic, and after the NES Classic, whole bunch of different retro flashback consoles were released. Now we've had flashback consoles before. We had the Atari Flashback in 2004, which was pretty much a flashback console for the Atari 2600 and 7800. It had a collection of games from the 2600 and 7800, but it did not have cartridges. You could only play the games that were pre-installed onto the console. And that's one thing I never understood about these consoles, is that it's literally an inferior version of the original console because you cannot play cartridges. You can only play the games that they say that you can play. Some of them come with 30 games, some of them come with 50 games, some of them come with 100 games. But still, let's say there's one obscure game you want to play on, let's say, the NES. Well, if it's not built into the console, you can't insert the cartridge into it and play it. So that's one big reason why I never saw the point of these consoles, because if you really want to play a lot of games, then you're going to end up needing something else besides these flashback consoles. You're going to have to download an emulator or just end up getting the original consoles. So these consoles are already inferior, these new re-release versions of these consoles, because they do not have any cartridge slots or whatever. They don't have any of that. They're flashback consoles, but you can't even use all the functionalities of the original console. So I always thought that was dumb, honestly. It's supposed to be the newest version of that console, and it's not even, it's pretty much obsolete to the original console that was released 20, 30 years ago. So that's one reason why I never had any interest in buying these consoles at all. But I'm just wondering, why are these consoles selling so well? The NES Classic, the Super Nintendo Classic, those Sega Genesis flashback consoles, and, so on and so forth. All these flashback consoles from back in the day, for some reason there's just a huge ass demand for them, and I don't see that's one thing I just don't understand. Nostalgia, obviously, but then again, if it's just nostalgia, then what about the games that you are nostalgic for that you cannot play on this new console? And at the end of the day, you can always buy an NES USB controller or a USB N64 controller or whatever, and just end up downloading the emulator for the console, honestly. That's really that's what I would do if I really had a fix for it. That's what I would do before buying these flashback consoles, at least, because I would have access to all the games, and there would also be no region locking either. So if there are games exclusive to Japan or whatever, I could still download them, like for the Genesis or the Super Nintendo or the NES, because there were a lot of region exclusive games back in the day, and they weren't sold in the US, so they wouldn't be on the flashback console either. But let's say there's an obscure game that you like. We all like obscure games that not a lot of people talk about. No matter whether you're a casual gamer or a hardcore gamer, you always think of that one game that you loved growing up, or even right now playing it, that not a lot of people talk about. It was kind of swept under the rug, or maybe the game was just on and they treat it unfairly. But everyone has that one obscure game that they like, no matter what generation it is. So let's say you wanted to play, I can't think of a game from the top of my head, but let's say there's a certain game on the NES that you really loved. Let's say you're in your 40s right now or whatever, and growing up with a NES, you played every single NES game that you could find, and you played so many of them, and then this flashback console comes out. But wait, there are only a certain number of pre-built games, and while, yeah, it's a great catalog, it's still not there's still some games that you're missing out on. But besides that whole aspect of just missing out on the games, there's another reason why I think that these consoles are stupid, and that's the price. Not saying that the consoles aren't affordable. They usually go for way under $100. $80, I think, is the SNES Classic. That's what I'm seeing right now. I'm looking at I'm looking at Google Shopping, and I'm seeing the results, and it's all of it is like $79.99. Some of them is $100, and some of them are even more than that because you got scalpers obviously trying to turn a profit. But I'm looking at the original SNES right now, like the original one, not the classic, not that console. I'm talking about the original SNES. Guess how much that costs? It's not $80, it's not $100, it's not more than that. It's $10. $10 for the SNES plus $3.99 shipping on eBay. That's the first thing that pops up. And I know some people are going to say, well, it's still a great value because you can play you already have a whole bunch of games pre-installed, so if you do the math, if you buy all those cartridges and you do all that stuff, then it's still worth it more financially to buy the SNES Classic. Well, yeah, it depends on your situation. If you're a new gamer that's never experienced the SNES before, then maybe, but a lot of the people who buy these consoles are doing it for nostalgic purposes, and I guarantee you a lot of those people do have the cartridges. Not just that, but a lot of the cartridges themselves aren't that expensive. Like, you look up Super Mario Brothers, let's look up Super Mario Brothers, for example, on the SNES. Cartridge. Give me a second, I'm sorry. Okay, so Super Mario All-Stars and Super Mario World, which is pretty much 2 games in one, is $15.99 for one cartridge. And $7.49 for Super Mario Kart. And yeah, I mean, the cartridges themselves are not expensive. They're much cheaper than a new game release because the SNES, I guess, was in good supply. So I would see if a typical SNES, no matter what condition it is, would be like starting point like $200 or $300, like way more expensive than the classic version of these consoles. But they're not. They're actually much cheaper in some cases and are less restrictive because you can actually play whatever damn game you want by inserting whatever cartridge you want. So, I don't know. I just don't see the point of these consoles. Obviously, there's something I'm not seeing because they're selling a ton of units every time they're released and there's so much hype around them. But overall, these consoles are they just seem like a waste of time and they seem pointless to me. Anyone who buys them, I don't understand why anyone would do that. Especially if you are a PC gamer, you're not going to buy it because you just download an emulator. And if you're doing it for nostalgia purposes, you probably already have a lot of the cartridges already. So just buy another SNES. What's the point of buying these classic consoles? I just don't see it. I don't.